Hi friends, welcome to CodeNet, and today we want to understand what HTML attributes are and how we can work with them. By definition, attributes are simply defined as additional information about the HTML elements. Additional information, please get that clearly, on HTML elements. Hence, elements and attributes are highly related. I'm sure you can even tell why I have not deleted the actual code that we are working on from our previous session that was talking about the HTML elements. It's because the attributes, they are implemented on the elements of HTML. And to understand on how they are connected and how they work with the elements of HTML, the attributes of HTML are defined in the opening or starting tag of an HTML element. Hence, we can't pass the attributes of HTML at this tag. No. Why? Because this is a closing tag for the HTML element, which is h1. Hence, they are passed in the opening tag or starting tag of an HTML element. Hence, at this h1, the starting h1 or the starting body or the starting paragraph, the starting h3, the starting paragraph again, the starting h6, that's where we need to pass the attributes of HTML. So the attributes of HTML, when working with HTML, definitely they follow the syntax of, this syntax, which is name, equal sign, and then the double quotes, and then this is where we place now the actual value. So here we give it the name that respective attribute actually uses, and then the equal sign, meaning we are telling this attribute that this is the value, this is the actual content that you should showcase the element that you are working on, because attributes work on elements of HTML. Now, how do we implement this? Definitely, let's see how we can implement at least 4 attributes of HTML, or even 5 to say, for we to see how we can now work with the other types of attributes of HTML, because when we have the basics, definitely, then we can also understand and work with the other attributes of HTML. So the first attribute that we'll see on how it works is the attribute which is called the style as an attribute. And since we've given the name for that attribute, don't forget, because they use the syntax which is name, equal sign, double quotes, then the value in between. So since we've given it definitely the name, which is style, as a key attribute in HTML, then it should be followed by an equal sign. Definitely the double quotes have even automatically or been auto-completed by the IDE, because also the IDE understands that the syntax is name, equal sign, double quotes, then the value in between. And you can tell where the cursor is blinking in between the double quotes, because we need to pass in the actual value. So style, as simply an attribute of HTML, allows us to style the actual attribute that we are working on. For example, it can be, what background color do you want this element to have? What is the actual weight of text that you want this element to have? What is the actual color that you want all the text that are inside this element to have? What is the actual behavior that you want this element to have? That is what the style as an attribute of HTML actually does to the element of HTML. For example, we can say, okay, I'm creating this as simply an attribute which is called style, and the actual value that I want this to have on the entire body of this page is to just change the background color. So we can say, okay, background definitely color of this body should be dark blue. And definitely when we say the background color dark blue, then from our browser here, definitely, since the background color by default was white, then it means when you refresh, the background color will change to dark blue. So it has definitely changed to dark blue, and this is what the actual style as an attribute, of course giving it a value of background color, actually does to the HTML element. Now again, when you go back on our browser, you can tell that the text in, of course, black doesn't look actually fit for the page. Hence, we can use again the style attribute to change the color text of this web page. How can we do this? Let's go now on the HTML, because we want to see if definitely the style as an attribute or any attribute can work on any of the HTML elements. So let's now try to pass in another type of value into the style attribute of HTML. So we're saying, okay, style, the actual HTML, since that's the HTML as in it's defining the entire page. So the actual style now, the value should equal to the color for the text. Of course, these are keywords. The color for the text should be white. So definitely we are saying, okay, I'm creating another attribute. This attribute should have effect on each and every content that is within the HTML as an element inside this web page. So the effect that it should have is every content that is in between the HTML should be changed to white, unlike here where we are seeing each and every content by default being black. So when we refresh, definitely the text will change to white. So that's what the attributes of HTML actually does. They actually entail the actual behavior for the respective element that they are working on. So this is the actual content that we've passed on using the style as an attribute of HTML. We'll understand more on the style as attribute of HTML as we analyze CSS inside these sessions of HTML, and of course sometimes they are called inline CSS. But we'll see, don't worry, on how we can implement this and see more and more styles value as the values that can be passed on to the style as an attribute of HTML. What other attributes can we talk about? The other attribute that we can actually talk about is an attribute that is implemented mainly in the img element of HTML. Don't forget, an element of HTML can either be an empty element or an element that can have content in between, like this one, h6 as a closing tag, of course also a opening tag, and content in between. But other types of elements like the horizontal row, like we discussed from our session, and the line break, these are simply the elements that are called empty elements because they don't have content in between. So like the img, of course, also it doesn't have, of course, the closing tag. Hence img is an element of HTML. Now img will of course provide the opening tag or the starting tag because that's what we respect when it comes to the elements of HTML. Now img, the attribute of img should definitely be inside this starting tag because attributes are defined in the starting tag of an element. Now the attribute that we want to talk about is the src standing in for source. This attribute of HTML allows us to work with images in our web page. Hence here we can now specify, when we put an equal sign under the value, we can pass the actual value, the actual name and the extension for the image that we want to work with. Now if you want to see the effectiveness of the src, please go on the same folder where you saved the file. Like here you can tell this is the folder where I've saved the file and this is the file that we are working on. Place any image inside the same folder. Like you can tell I've placed in the logo image, and immediately when you take the cursor on that image, you'll see the extension for the image. Mine is png, I'm sure you can tell. So its actual name is logo.png. So when you go back now, after placing, of course, copy and paste the image into the same folder. After placing the image in the same folder, go back now on the IDE. Here in this IDE, definitely we need to now entail the actual value, which is the name for the image, including the extension that we want to send to the src as simply an attribute of HTML. Hence the name of the image is logo, I'm sure you know, and the actual extension is .png. So definitely we've now passed on the image into the attribute src, which is under the img element of HTML. When we go on our browser, Ctrl S to save, my document is on autosave. When we refresh, you can tell that we even have the image definitely on our browser. Now you can again see that, okay, yes, we have the image, but this image, it doesn't look appropriate. It's over zoomed and anything related to that. So since attributes of HTML are used when we want to entail the actual description or to add information definitely on the elements of HTML, then it means we can even control the size of this image for as long as we've passed on the very appropriate information that is needed into the elements that we want to hold on to those values that will control the size of an image. When we go back on our IDE, we can control its behavior, meaning we are again introducing another attribute of HTML that is passed on to an img as an element of HTML. This attribute is called width, definitely an equal sign and the value. So we can say, okay, the width should be 200. Another attribute is called height. Okay, the height for this image definitely should be, when we provide the equal sign, the value should be in between the double quotes. The height should be 150. Definitely Ctrl S to save. When we go back on our browser, again, we'll see that we've added additional information to an img as an element of HTML. Immediately when we refresh, definitely we'll also have a good looking image. We've placed an image inside our HTML page using the src as an attribute of HTML, and we've controlled the behavior for the image because we are working with img as the image or element of HTML. So we've also controlled the behavior by using the width as an attribute of HTML and height as an attribute of HTML. Other attributes, please double check the link, because if we were to talk about all the attributes of HTML, then it can take weeks or anything related to that. So double check the description, you see actually a link to full analysis of other types of attributes that we can pass definitely on the elements of HTML. Let me just implement another one. For example, this one is of course also a style as an attribute. We can say style, definitely when we do that, equal sign, the value, now we can change the value for this as h1. We can say, okay, text align, I want this definitely to be centered. So we can say, okay, text align center, meaning this, since this is h1, as this value which is passed on to this attribute of HTML will only have effect on this h1. If we go back on our browser, again we refresh the document, we'll see that h1 will definitely be centered. So attributes of HTML, we can use them if we want to control or to add multiple information to the elements of HTML. Please don't forget to subscribe, and let's proceed on our next session as we understand now what headings are and what paragraphs are when it comes to HTML. We've just been talking heading, paragraph, but what are these and what other information have we not talked about? Let's proceed in our next session, and please don't forget to subscribe. You are on Coordinate.